Hey everybody, welcome back to our weekly podcast. My name is Patrick Tan, our general counsel for Chain Argos. With me, as usual, every week, our CEO Chief Data Scientist, Jonathan Ryder, who's beaming in from a remote location. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for tuning into the podcast. And this week, what will we have for you? We're going to talk a little bit about Vitalik's stablecoin summary, Vitalik Buterin, of course, of Ethereum fame. Then we're going to talk about the American market structure bill. This is the latest draft, I believe, the latest draft of the bill that's passing through this would be the Senate, I think, at this stage. And basically what that bill it's colloquially known as the Clarity Act. So John's going to give us the 411. He's read it so that you guys don't have to. And then we're going to talk a little bit about co-spending. Now, co-spending, what's that exactly? We'll dive a little bit into the details of co-spending and how that affects blockchain tracing and so-called heuristics. And then finally, we have a little bit of bonus content about a specific project that John is quite enamored of, simply for intellectual and humor reasons. But let's just jump straight into John. Tell me more a little bit about this Vitalik's latest on stablecoins. Well, what's
So
going on?
there was a bit of a back and forth. Forget which prominent lawyer, Vitalik, about some stablecoin sort of what we really need to fix these problems.
Okay.
And I thought it was interesting because I read this and thought I was in 2021 again, um, because I think we kind of now know the issues here. Um, so that I guess he listed three problems with the current system that sort of with the sort of goals of the current system, right?
Okay.
Which is mostly dollar stable coins and trying to give you a little bit of distance from the financial system for dollar stable coins.
Okay.
So the three goals that were listed were find an index that's better than the dollar.
Okay.
We can come back to that one in a second, right?
Sure.
Finding an oracle design because we've already accepted that you have to have off-chain assets, right?
Okay.
Uh, find an oracle design that's decentralized and you can't just capture easily, right? This is the typical criticism of Chainlink that it's just voting on the truth, and if you have
Yeah.
enough, you can buy the truth, and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
literally how it works. So
Yeah.
um, and then the third one is an interesting take. Actually, this is I think the most sort of mind expanding part here is to think about the idea that staking yield is competition for stablecoin yield, right? They are definitely two different yields, but I
Yeah.
think Domino's competition is, come to that one. Right? So okay, so those are interesting things to view as the core problems faced today. Right?
Okay.
So I think we take the second one first, right? The Oracle design, because that
Okay.
is
It's the
required,
easy the easiest one to neatly tuck away.
right? So we know that you can't have a completely automated, decentralized way of determining the truth.
Yep.
I suppose we can have a way of determining the truth for however physics works because that's the universe. But other than that, like we can't, the physics does whatever it does, right?
Yeah.
Other than that, it doesn't seem like there is a computational process for that. So, okay. Um, so you can either view this as his statement that you want to find a design that's not capturable with a large pool of money, or if you don't think you can do that, the other way to view this is there are going to be scaling limits to all of these things. Right?
I can accept that.
So yeah, I think that's probably the healthier way to look at it. The long-term solution, if there is a solution, will require a diverse pool of things. And your solution isn't to find a design that's invincible. There isn't one. Your solution is to have a bunch of near substitutes and people can move from one to the other as necessary and they can diversify. Um, now, the same guy has enough money and buys up control over all of them. But it's a
Yeah.
recurring problem, right? You
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
So it seems like I view that framing as backwards, right? I mean, we know math, computer science stuff. You can't have a decentralized oracle that does this. So the solution is diversification, which necessarily introduces frictions, which might be part of why the traditional financial system works the way like the frictions exist for a reason sometimes.
Yeah.
So that connects very well to the second. Well, what was the third point in his list? What I view as the second point in the list, solving the problem that staking yield is competition. So what you're
Yeah.
saying here is there's a native yield to ETH, and dollars pay some yield that's whatever dollars pay or euros pay or whatever, and if the yield on ETH is high enough, people don't want to earn the dollar yield. And you're just describing, covered interest rate parity. You're describing foreign exchange trading, Mundell-Fleming, all of that normal stuff. So I don't think that you really want to view these things as competition at all, any more than you view, you know, euro-denominated government bills as competition for yen-denominated government bills or dollar-denominated government bills,
Yeah.
right? It's more of an asset liability matching problem. And
That's just the
the
way the market works.
yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
issue is that people don't have euro denominated, ether denominated liabilities, Bitcoin
Yeah.
denominated liabilities for the most part. So there's less demand to hold those money market instruments other than for speculative purposes, investing, portfolio management purposes. Um, the solution, such as it is to have more people have liabilities denominated in those things so they can, right? Why are the money markets biggest in dollars? Because the liabilities are biggest in dollars. Is that recursive, circular? Sure, whatever, right? There's the most bonds in dollars because most bonds are issued in dollars. Okay, we ended up where we are, right? It's not, this is not an argument for first principles. This is an observation about the world. So they're not really competition. Will more money flow in the higher the yield is in one than the other? You're just describing how to maintain a peg currency there, right? So you raise the interest rate, whatever. Okay, fine. But that's just economics. And
The
how do I?
thing, I mean,
We
the
can
thing
argue.
that surprises me, and maybe you can help me out a little bit with this. It feels like, you know how you're kind of bending over backwards to scratch your nose kind of thing. Like it
Hmm.
feels that with every
Mhm.
single additional compromise, okay, this thing becomes too centralized, so therefore we have to decentralize it. And then, but oh, if we decentralize it, that adds more friction. And then we could try to redistribute that decentralization so that we make all these small compromises, but then that adds multiple layers of friction. How is this better than
Okay.
what we
So
have? I mean, just purely from a devil's advocate point of view.
I think the answer to your question is to point out what I think is the third item to look at, the first one on his list, move away from dollars to something better.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that viewing that as a problem tells you the root cause of what you're talking about right there. Uh, you don't get to tell people what they want. There's
You don't get to tell
demand.
people what they like as well.
Yeah, there's demand for these in dollars.
Yeah.
People have products in other currencies. There just isn't any use.
Yeah.
So you can't make them want something else or need something else or whatever and when you're talking about dollars, euros, yen, or whatever, it's not like, oh, I've come up with this fabulous new use case for the euro. Like, right? That's not a realistic claim to make, right?
Yeah.
So you have to view this more as there's demand. I mean, he wanted to have something pegged to like some basket of goods so that it's inflation protected. Forgetting even the issues with doing that, say you could do that. People try to do that. There's no demand. Now,
Yeah.
is that demand because they don't want the product in the first place or because the product doesn't work? I can't say for sure, but I think we can both agree that there's historically been an awful lot of demand for stuff that didn't work. And that doesn't seem to stop people from buying a lot of things.
Yeah.
So, if
Oh,
if people wanted it, they'd buy it and then it would blow up afterwards. But
correct. Also, I think there's this question about which it's a strange question to ask, and to me seems like the question that somebody who doesn't understand market psychology would ask is,
yeah,
because when you say something's better than something else, then you're making a qualitative statement. And the problem with that, of course, is that better for whom? And if there's people have been railing against the dollar for a long time, and I think if you remember the days of the British Empire, the pound was still used for a long, long time after the sun set on the British Empire. And even for the Roman Empire, when that empire called it a day, the denarii was still continued to be used as the currency of the realm well after the barbarian horde was already in Rome. And whatever your thoughts about America are, and whatever your thoughts about the dollar are, I can assure you that that probably going to still be around for a while, no matter what, before we all start using caps in a post-apocalyptic world.
this,
Um,
this
Go
This
ahead.
is the problem with engineers that aren't managed, right? So you can compare two different designs for dollar stable coins, and one can be
Sure.
better. One can
Yeah.
objectively be better, right? Because there can be only positives or negatives, whatever. And then when you say, oh, well, we've done a really good job on this, but what if we just change the purpose of the product to be this other thing? That's even better. Like the users are not looking for you're not improving on the same use case. You've changed the use case because you like the new software, technology, whatever you can build. That is not marketing. you need Effectively, you need product management to tell you, no, 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 no. Those changes are not what we're looking for here. We're in the business of X, not Y. right?
Yeah.
And you're trying to innovate on the wrong part of the
Absolutely. I think they're trying to innovate on the wrong part. Well, it was misguided, I guess, in terms of that. Like the dollar has product market fit. Hey, it may not be the best product, but it definitely have product market fit. And the ancillary services that go with that dollar have also found product market fit on the basis of the dollar.
yeah.
So trying
And
to
if,
go
and sorry,
ahead.
and if people wanted a different product, they would buy a
They would already
broken
have gone with
they'd
it.
buy a
Yeah.
broken version of that product and then it would get
Yeah.
fixed later.
Yeah.
They wouldn't wait for the perfect version of that product before buying it, since everything else they bought along the way was broken too. I just don't believe that what's holding them back is designs that don't work. Like it,
Correct. And I think this is oftentimes one of the struggles that we see when it comes to, you know, organizations where you have this is why there's all this division of labor where you have marketing teams, you have product development teams, you have
right.
product design teams, you have engineering teams, you've got the business leads. And oftentimes people go, yeah, it's a clunky structure. Why don't we just have everything led by developers? Well, that's because then developers would build something that nobody would want to use because they haven't
Well,
spoken.
what they normally end up doing is building a product that they want to use,
Correct.
which is
Not
generally a
necessarily.
smaller market than, yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a niche thing, and sometimes they luck out. Um,
I will say, however, just we can endorse the official IDE of Chain Argos, right? The JetBrains people are a company that
yeah,
explicitly makes
yeah,
software for
absolutely.
software developers only, and their stuff is fantastic because the developers run it and they only sell to developers. If you went to them and said, "I'd like a word processor," they would say,
We'll go
"Nope,
somewhere else.
we support LaTeX. Go away."
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, go somewhere else.
You
And
can,
I think that's fine. And I think oftentimes people forget that all of this started off as a bunch of like, cyberpunk, type, who sort of like extreme liberal, anti-global world
sorry,
order kind of thing.
libertarian.
Libertarian, that's right, libertarian. Started off as a libertarian bent and libertarian movement, and then we're ending up with something that looks, to me,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
no expert, but it looks a lot like the traditional
yeah,
financial system
yeah, yeah.
with like, do you remember the days when people would slap on a .com at the back of their company and then their stock price would go up? It kind of feels like that, but
Yeah, no, it's go ahead. Internet
so
banking things. Yeah.
all right, switching gears, the market structure bill, which, I have to say, despite all of the hue and cry that's going on in Capitol Hill, this is pretty sensible. It's a sensible approach.
So not only is this sensible, what I find most entertaining here is that most of the news is in fact not about the contents of the bill, but about the disagreements over the bill.
Yeah,
And for the first time, really quite a rare occurrence, we agree almost entirely with Coin Center,
yeah,
said roughly this is roughly reasonable. And many people do not like it, most publicly Coinbase, which
hmm
stormed off. And there is reporting that Coinbase's abrupt 180 and storming off, no longer supporting a bill that they've been touting for a very long time, uh,
correct.
pissed off the White House and a number of other people because they just, threw their toys out of the pram. And so it reveals a lot about what's really sort of going on here.
Which we've alluded to for many years, I might add.
Well, so when you said this is called clarity, if you go through this, you actually notice that different sections begin by saying they can be called, and they have it duct taped in the names of a whole bunch of different things that I've put together over the years. The first sort of overall theme through here that seems to have bothered some people is that they make a very clear distinction between decentralized and non-decentralized things, DAOs, protocols, tokens, products, whatever. And generally speaking, the exemptions only apply to the decentralized versions, um, which is the thing that Coin Center seems give or take okay with. We're okay with. It's intellectually consistent. In
Yeah, it's
fact,
fair.
even consistent with what various Web3 lawyers that now work for companies that resist this thing have written for years about. And it's because the products that they have are not actually decentralized.
That could be
When
an
did we
issue.
first? I think we talked on the podcast about Coinbase and Base,
Yeah,
and
a long time
Coinbase
ago.
Base is 2023 probably.
Yeah,
Coinbase has a problem in that they wave their hands about decentralized, but most of the Coinbase DeFi is not decentralized. And I mean that in the specific sense of reading the definitions in this legislation, they would not count
they would not, yeah, satisfy
qualify for
those
decentralized
definitions. That's correct.
exemption. Yeah. So that's a problem for them. And they resist that. Now they claim that AML is required for DeFi. What they're saying is that if you run an interface to a DeFi protocol, that interface may have to follow some rules. And if you have a DeFi protocol that you have admin keys for, you just run the thing and you're responsible. You have to follow the rules and all this stuff. I heard one discussion on a podcast among a bunch of commentators, again, lawyers who work for these types of companies. They were essentially arguing that control that exists for the purposes of safety, cue the Simpsons meme of, oh, think of the children, right? If it exists for the purposes of safety, then it should be allowed. They don't see why you would want to discourage people from being safe. I'm actually drafting my blockhead column. My example for that one is Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis and the quarantine. And one of the things they talked about for the quarantine of Cuba was to conduct health and safety inspections. It ended up being for security, not for
Of
safety.
course.
Like safety is going to get repurposed by somebody to mean something you don't want it to mean. And that's a terrible, vague word to use, right? It's just childish to think that exemptions for total control because of safety are a good idea.
Yeah, I had this conversation not too long ago with the attorney took an even more cynical view, like, oh, we have zero control over the platform. We have it's completely decentralized. Oh yeah, sure, but what about the fact that you can shut it down? Oh, but and reverse transactions. Oh, but that's purely for safety. We would never use that.
Purely for safety. Yeah. So purely for safety. Now, the problem with politicians is that, and I'm speaking very broadly and not about any specific person
Of
if I
course.
here, but like everybody, right? They're good at lying and they know how to spot weasel words and
Yep,
setting
yep, yep, yep.
opportunity to weasel into lie when they see one.
Yeah.
And then a politician is going to look at that and think, uh, I know what I would do if I was in that situation. I would find a way to, right?
Yeah, yeah. I know what I am, but what are you?
Tricking politicians into giving you weasel out opportunities in the future. No, that isn't going to work. They're going to have the weasel out opportunities, not you.
Yeah, they do claim monopoly on the visa
Yeah. Well,
opportunities.
they're not going to want to have supported something that gives
Yeah.
you an exemption when you eventually pull some shutdown switch and then like for a nefarious purpose that you've you've cloaked in whatever safety. They're not going to lose their whatever their standing, their position. They're not going to be embarrassed by you.
Yeah.
Nor should they be. I mean, I'm defending that side of things. Um, yeah, so don't get into a lying competition with an elected official. That's just not, or a
It's
disingenuous competition, right? That's just not going to work.
yeah,
Right?
the deck is stacked against you in that
It's stacked
situation.
against you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So there
So
are a number of problems there. You even had some people have to come out, some lawmakers have to come out and say that no, this isn't industry supported. This is all just being developed organically by us, which is probably not going to end very well.
well, let me read out some of the specific bits that you've actually pulled out here. On page 239, you talk about the DAO governance exclusion,
Yeah.
and it confirms that DAOs are partnerships at least sometimes. And I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, because if the DAOs are partnerships sometimes, I gotta ask the things about like the liability, the accountability, the need to file accounts and tax.
All kinds of stuff. And the legislation is quite clear that unless you fit one of these exemptions, you're just subject to the normal rules for whatever corporate organizations, unincorporated, incorporated, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you also noticed that um, you know, the KYC AML rules applying to non-decentralized finance in section 301. And I agree with you on all of this stuff. I mean, like, real decentralized finance is exempt. And the problem is, of course, the definition of what decentralized means and when does it, render you sort of subject to the rules. Again,
Well, if
and
you're
I
controlled by a DAO and a DAO is nothing outside the normal rules, then right.
I think where it's less clear for me is anybody going to do anything about this? So
Well, if it doesn't get passed,
yeah,
the part, in fact, I think that makes it hardest to get past is the developer protections part.
yeah, yeah,
So it makes very clear that nobody, I think I have the exact, no one will be charged, quote, solely on the basis of
yeah,
writing software that I'm unaware of a circumstance in which anyone has been charged with a financial crime solely on the basis of
yeah, yeah,
writing software. Now, the legislation does clarify that deployment itself,
yeah,
without ownership or control, it still qualifies as writing software.
yeah,
That's slightly new. We have a lot of people who claim they were only writing software and then they get, charged for
yeah,
tweeting out
yep, 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 yep,
Russian
yep,
oligarch users, right?
yep, yep,
So I think there will be a problem here when legislators, and this is what's happening now, see the complaints, read the bill and say, this says you can't be charged just for writing software. It's very clear. And the
Yeah.
answer is, well, what about this guy? And then they go read the indictment, because again, they're also mostly lawyers. Right? Read the
Yeah.
indictment. Well, this guy's charged with all kinds of stuff that's got nothing to do with writing software. What are you talking
Yeah.
about? People seem to want, and I've heard almost exactly these words, right? An exemption from financial crimes if you wrote software.
Yeah.
Well, like that's lunacy.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I
And
think
you're never going to get that through Congress. No matter how much money your lobbyists get,
correct.
you're not going to get that through Congress.
Yeah. So and also I think people often underestimate how watered down some of this language will end up becoming when Trump actually puts pen and paper to sign.
I don't know. That one's tough because the solely on the basis of is about the broadest exemption that you can see, frankly, anybody in
Yeah.
Congress approving. They're not going to approve an exemption from all criminal prosecution because you once wrote code. That's just
Yeah.
not going to get passed. And even if it gets passed, that'll get thrown out in court.
Yeah. I mean, well, they could interpret it. So let's say, for instance, if I'm going to indict you, because the reality of the matter is that if you really just wrote the code and you walked away from it, maybe, but I think I would say
There
probably
are
in
no
eight,
cases in which anyone's been charged for that.
yeah. So and I would say that nine out of 10 of these cases, you would probably have done a lot more than that than just writing code and walking away from that. It would have been like a combination such that, your having written the code is only part of a broader conspiracy to do certain things. And I think for any reasonable prosecutor, that's not going to be difficult to establish.
Yeah, and what they want is that you can't be charged for a conspiracy in which one of the contributory acts on your part was the writing of code. Well, that's complete lunacy because then you can
Yeah.
have a murder conspiracy, write some
Yep,
code,
yep,
and
yep,
you're good.
yep, yep, yep,
Like
yep.
that, no one's going to accept that.
Because the
It's a
logical
non-starter.
conclusion of this is ludicrous. It's unlikely. I agree. Yeah, that's going to be the case. Okay, so anyway, if you guys want to check it out, the market structure draft, we're gonna make that stuff available. Have a look at it, and then it's what 278 odd pages,
These
200.
things it's very
Yeah,
long,
it's long, but it's
but
in
it's
big
the
font.
usual like tiny pages, but fun.
Yeah, so it's still worth a look. Finally, I'm gonna ask you a little bit about this stuff. I know you've been working on a paper that is basically evaluating this co-spend heuristic. So
Okay.
for those of you who don't know, let's just give them a little bit of background. What is a co-spend heuristic in one sentence or less?
Well, okay, I'm going to explain how Bitcoin transactions work.
Okay.
And then I'll explain in one sentence what the
Okay.
code heuristic is. So Bitcoin transactions are not like Ethereum transactions, right?
Yep.
So Bitcoin is based on what's known as an unspent transaction output
Yep.
model. So every transaction is all the inputs pay all the outputs. So
Okay.
there could be one input and one output. There can be
Yep.
12 inputs and 12 outputs,
Yep.
whatever. But each transaction in Bitcoin has n inputs and m outputs, and they
Okay.
all collectively pay everybody together. That's
Okay.
simple version. That's how Bitcoin transactions work. The co-spend heuristic is to assume that
Yep.
when you have a multi-input transaction in Bitcoin, that all of the inputs belong to the same person
Okay.
or same entity, person,
Sure. Sure. Sure.
under
Person,
common
woman, man, camera, TV, something like
right,
that.
are under common control. That's
Yeah.
the heuristic. The heuristic is very simple. You just have to know that Bitcoin transaction structure is a little bit strange. And so this dates to about 2013 when this was
Yep.
first put together. The theory behind it is very simple. The theory is that Bitcoin users don't like to share their private keys, and you need all the private keys to all the inputs to generate a valid transaction. Okay.
Is that
Those
true?
are both reasonable sounding statements. They're both true sometimes and false sometimes.
I see.
So Bitcoin users obviously share their private keys more than ever.
Okay.
For example, if you deposit your coins to an exchange, they're no longer under your private keys control. So
Agree.
okay with a little bit of sharing in that sense. Also, there are protocols that allow you to generate these transactions without sharing your private keys.
Okay.
And that's, goes back to the 80s. So it's cryptography stuff that lets you do that. So both of those assumptions are reasonable assumptions, and the heuristic is reasonable under those assumptions, but they're not ironclad. They're not physics, right? It's not gravity. It's not just a thing that's objectively true, at least approximately to whatever we can measure. We're not talking about gravity here. Yeah, I mean, it's not that kind of approximation. And there are certainly circumstances in which we know they're false.
Okay.
For example, it is not complicated to build a CoinJoin service in which the users do not share private keys with each other. right? So we can synthesize. I could go write the code. I could rent a machine from a cloud server, and I could run a mixer that did that. That's a crime, and I'm not doing that. Maybe it's per the earlier conversation, but it's a straightforward engineering exercise.
Yeah.
There's nothing uncomplicated to do there. Similarly, the sharing private keys thing. Plenty of people share their private keys. There's all kinds of hacks related to, fine, social engineering, phishing. Sometimes you steal them. Sometimes the people just give them to you. Sometimes you can get a generative AI to hand them to you, right? These are all things. So the question is, how reliable is this heuristic, given that it's a heuristic? Heuristic is a word for, rule of thumb, guess, right?
Guessing. Yeah.
Educated guessing system. And so there were some results published by Chainalysis on the quality of their tools a while ago, which were, I think, a little bit surprising.
Okay.
Uh, there are two kinds of errors you can make when you're trying to figure out. So forget in general who owns all these addresses. Just pretend the addresses are either owned by service X or not owned by service X, the binary version of the problem, the simple
Yeah.
version. There's two mistakes you can make. One of the mistakes is to say it's part of the service when it's not, and one of the mistakes is to say it's not part of the service when it is. Right? If you're picking 0 or 1, the two errors are 0 when it should be 1 and 1 when it should be 0. Only two types of errors. And you would expect, if your rule worked pretty well, that you'd get vaguely similar amounts of both errors. I'm not saying they have to be identical, but the results that Chainalysis reported indicated that they made one type of error essentially never, 0.01% of the time. And they made the other type of error like half the time. I think it was 5, 25, and 75% of the time, 3 different tests. So if you make one type of error 0.01% of the time, and one type of error 50% of the time, it's pretty obvious that your system was tuned to only make one type of error and not the other type of error.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody understands that. So we were discussing this earlier. You think about the way the thumb scan on your mobile phone works, right? Many times you've picked up your mobile phone and it didn't unlock. You had to scan your thumb again, scan your thumb again. Everybody's had that experience with any kind of thumb scanner. How often does your mobile phone unlock if you don't touch the button, right? It's tuned to only make one type of error, which is sometimes it won't unlock when it should have unlocked. But your phone basically never unlocks when it shouldn't have. Have you ever seen your phone unlock when it shouldn't have?
No, not,
Have
I
you
can't
tried
say
to
that I
close
have.
it and accidentally pressed the button with your thumb and found in your pocket it was unlocked, right? But you've never held your phone in the palm of your hand and watched it spontaneously unlock itself. And you can imagine why you would tune the system for that type of error.
Of
It's fun.
course.
This system looks like it was tuned for a certain type of error. Well, that's not great because who knows if that works for other cases. So anyway, the work that I did was to start to put together a testing regime using new data to figure out if it works. We can go through the details of that later, but under my new testing regime, it fails miserably and fails both types of errors all the time. I think in my worst case, it had 83% error for one type and 96% error for the other type. Routinely has 50% error for both types, 30% error, amounts of error that are huge, which is not great. The testing that I synthesized is probably the worst case, or on a level of the worst type of cases for the heuristic, because the two assumptions fail badly for the type of testing that I put together. But that's still really bad. So we've now got basically two results out there. One of them is this thing never makes error A, often makes error B. And the other result is this thing's making errors A and B all the time. That's not great for something used in court as a forensic proof of ownership and reliability and send people to prison. And
It's not ideal. And I think one of the things that concerns me even more is that this is being used not just in the United States, but in multiple jurisdictions
yeah.
on the basis that it works. And of course, I mean, when you say that this is the highest level, what you're basically saying is that when you put it to test in the extreme, what you're getting is you're seeing errors everywhere. And so now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to start looking at like, going sort towards the middle cases, that meaty part of the curve and sort of figuring out if that's going to still be the case.
So yeah, I guess we've got testing at maybe two extremes. I suspect that you can find cases it's even better at than the ones Chainalysis analyzed, or the researchers looking at Chainalysis tools were. I'm not sure you can find anything worse. I mean, on some level, 85 and 95%. That's about as bad as it
Yeah,
can be.
you get the blue ribbon prize at that
You can't
stage.
get 100% error if you have a binary class, unless it's hard coded. That's hard, right? It's very
Yeah,
so.
you've
Yeah.
basically cleared the uprights in that situation. I think
Whereas you can imagine they could lower that from 75 to 10. You could,
yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I would like to.
And I think this goes back to the point. We're not saying that this stuff is completely useless, but I think we need to understand when and how it should be used, just like any tool that you have, not just an analytics tool, but like, a hammer. Maybe, you don't want to use a hammer when it comes to trying to fix your computer. It's stuff like that,
I mean, you'll have people who say, well, it's useful because they, use it and go get search warrants and find evidence.
which I think is
And
fine.
yeah, so I guess it's important. So we've got two data points at the moment. They're basically two data points here. Um, the number one thing everybody needs is more data. So I'd like to contribute to more data. We need
Sure.
more data in general. And there are really three regimes generically across legal systems everywhere for reliability, right? You can use this to try to convict people.
Yeah.
There's this, you
And,
can use
and
this
have
to
you written
try to
about
get,
this? Yeah.
yeah,
You've written about this.
yeah. You can use it to try to get a search warrant, and you just can't use this because it's a hunch, right?
Yeah.
The person who's everybody with red hair is a thief or whatever. Like, that's just not, you can't arrest people on that basis, basically anywhere in the world. That's just not the way
Well,
it
depends
works.
on which state you're in, but yeah,
I
anyway,
mean, you need more than a hunch.
you do need more than a
You need
hunch.
something more than just a
You need
suspicion.
more than what would typically be described of as racial
I
profiling.
woke up with a feeling that they were guilty, right? That's not gonna, right? So we need to get enough data to start to figure out which things fit in which buckets in which circumstances. And if you can clear the get a search warrant hurdle, and the search warrant, I've discussed this actually with the head of another analytics company, if the search warrant then gives you evidence that proves your case, present the evidence.
Yeah.
The issue that we're talking about specifically here, I think, 2 years from now, when this is in a courtroom, is cases where the search warrant didn't produce much evidence, and those are the cases where the tracing ends up being the thing used in court. You
Yeah.
shouldn't be using tracing in court. You should
Yeah.
be using the stuff that came out of the trace, or you should be using tracing in a hearing to get a warrant.
Or you should be
If it
using
shows up
the
at the
the
trial,
tracing
there's a
to
problem.
get the warrant.
Yeah.
So one of something that was interesting that was told to me by somebody from the Guardia di Finanza,
Ah,
um and so they use the tracing, and they don't use any commercial tools in Italy because it is it is not the Italian way, but so neither is spaghetti and
probably
meatballs,
found a
but
way to get
that's a
them for
different
free.
story. So they get that stuff in. They do the manual tracing, and then what happens is that they usually get the accused person to confess. Now, whether or not they beat the confession out of him or something,
It
I
looks,
I'm not saying that,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah, the
that
point
but
is,
that's what but the point that you're making,
the
that there
evidence
is a
used
way
at
to
the
do that.
trial is not the tracing, it's stuff that the tracing led you to.
Correct.
If
And
the
and
guy confessed, the
yeah,
tracing doesn't come in at the trial.
exactly. And like the tracing isn't important at all. I guess
Well, it
where
was
it,
important to get you there. It got
yeah,
you the
correct.
warrant, which
So
got
you,
you the
you get
guy.
it gets you warrant. I got you the search and the search warrant for the premises, and then you find a whole bunch of thumb drives and stuff like that, and then the guy goes, you got me. I like to play out. I like to get into a deal, and then that's okay. I think that's fine. But where the only piece of evidence that you have is this tracing stuff, and his guilt or innocence, as it may be, hinges purely on the basis of your agent's tracing
Hinges
testimony.
purely or primarily, or even if it comes into the trial at
I
all, it's
think
not.
I think the language that we're looking for is uh solely on the basis of.
There you go. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, so I think we both agree that many of the cases where the tracing is actually involved in the controversial trial, that's probably going to fall away. The
Yeah.
real question for me is how useful this is, how much this is going to be allowed for warrants and whatnot in the first place.
Yeah.
It certainly should be allowed
I think in terms of probable
reasonable
cause,
fraction
yeah.
of the time. I don't
Yeah.
know what to tell you.
Yeah.
But it's not a blank slate
Yeah.
either.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's not a
because
free for all.
what we're
Um,
looking at here is definitely already proven to not be like DNA evidence.
oh, I don't
It's
think,
not a question of
yeah.
how many nines there are in the accuracy rate, right? It
Yeah.
isn't one of those things. This particular heuristic, there are other techniques, whatever. Yeah, and so that's a situation where you just present the thing at trial, and that's the end of the conversation, right? There's no, was the machine calibrated properly? Yes. Was the chain of custody of the samples proper? Those are the only
Yeah.
things you can
Yeah.
argue about. Was the
Yeah.
testing process is perfect? You're going to need something like that here, and it's going to be a little bit more elaborate. I mean, there have been allegations regarding the Mt. Gox stuff that the
Yeah.
data, it is a known fact that the data was at least partially corrupted. There have been
Yeah.
allegations that data might have been corrupted in ways that meant that it wasn't reliable anyway.
Yeah.
If the data is not reliable, any tracing derivative of that shouldn't be used for anything. This is
You
example
you
of
would assume that that would be the case, and I think
tainted blood samples. You can't use the tracing. So all of that stuff needs some infrastructure built up, which will allow more than zero testing and less than 100% usage of these things, which is
yeah,
the right.
which I think it's well not just the right. It's more mature to just stand back and say that our stuff is infallible. I mean, the last time I checked, it was only the Pope, but then it was only on certain doctrinal issues that he was infallible. But the rest of the stuff,
And only for certain people, yeah.
correct.
I'm not the only legal system that holds the Pope infallible, I think, is the Vatican legal
Yeah,
system.
yeah, that's the one. So, all right. That's probably all the time we have for you guys today.
Okay. Who's going to do
And
the
I
bonus content on Fuse for 30 seconds?
well, we've really run over. Okay, let's
Okay.
do we'll talk about Fuse the
We,
next
okay.
at the next podcast.
Okay, we can do that. That's fine. I'll tease
All right.
Fuse. Fuse is
F
great because they were
Fuse is
honest,
great. Yeah,
honest and straightforward.
which is refreshing if you ask me. It's like a Pepsi on a hot day. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all your likes and subscribes and comments and keep them coming. We love doing these podcasts because it's entertaining for us and we hope it's entertaining for you. But otherwise, we'll see you again next week. Bye bye.